The restaurant was quiet. Too quiet for a night that was meant to be celebratory. Candlelight flickered in ornate glass holders, casting dancing shadows on the white tablecloth. The soft clinking of silverware and the occasional low murmur of conversation filled the space with a subdued elegance. The smell of roasted garlic and fresh basil floated through the air, mingling with the sharp scent of Diane's perfume. Expensive, cold, and unmistakably intentional. I sat between Ethan and his mother, adjusting the sleeves of my cream-colored blouse for the 5th time. My palms were clammy, and my heart beat a little too fast for a woman who was, in theory, celebrating her future. Tonight was supposed to mark the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. Our engagement had been announced 2 weeks earlier, and Ethan suggested we have a small dinner to make it official with his family. But as the evening unfolded, it felt less like a celebration and more like a silent examination. Diane had that kind of presence, the kind that quietly demanded attention and subtly critiqued every movement. Her posture was straight, her jaw tense beneath layers of poise. She smiled often, but only with her lips. Her eyes remained still, dissecting, watching, measuring. From the moment I arrived, I sensed something was off. The waiter had greeted Ethan and Diane by name. The table was already set for 3, but the seating arrangement had been dictated. Diane took the seat of honor at the head of the table, flanked by her son on one side and me, neatly placed on the other. The symbolism was not lost on me. The menu sat untouched for several minutes while Diane asked me a series of questions disguised as polite conversation. "So, Rachel, remind me again where you studied? Your parents, what do they do? I don't believe I've met them yet. And you're still working. Where was it? A nonprofit, yes? How quaint." Each question was carefully crafted to expose something, not to learn, but to evaluate. Ethan, sitting to my right, kept his focus on his wine glass more than on the conversation. He smiled when appropriate, nodded when prompted, but never once intervened. Never once redirected the conversation to something lighter, warmer, or more inclusive. It was as though he had handed me over for inspection, and I was expected to endure it with grace. Still, I smiled. I had learned long ago that silence could be a shield, that graciousness under pressure could disarm the cruelest judgments. So I answered with calm precision, refusing to offer any more of myself than what the question required. Then came the turning point. Our entrees had just arrived. Ethan's seared duck breast, Diane's seafood risotto, and a vegetarian pasta dish for me that now sat steaming but untouched. I was reaching for my napkin when she spoke, her tone light, almost whimsical. "You know, Rachel, you really ought to be grateful. Ethan is a good man. And considering your history, it's a blessing he chose you." The sentence floated in the air for a moment, as if unsure where to land. Then it hit. Direct, deliberate, and irreparable. I froze. My fingers tightened slightly around the napkin. I looked at her, at the perfectly composed woman with pearl earrings and a half-smile on her face. I saw not just disapproval, but entitlement. She did not merely think I was unworthy. She believed she was stating a truth too obvious to be offensive. Ethan, my fiancé, let out a small nervous laugh, a chuckle, as if what had just been said was awkward, maybe inappropriate, but not intolerable. He did not look at me. He did not say my name. He did not defend. In that exact moment, everything fell into place. I saw the future stretched out in front of me, holidays filled with subtle insults masked as family jokes, decisions made behind closed doors, a marriage where I would be constantly reminded, through glances, whispers, and cold silences, that I had been accepted despite my past. And that past, while not perfect, was mine. I had fought to survive it. I had rebuilt from ruins that no one in that room could comprehend. A failed engagement, emotional abuse, debt. Nights spent on borrowed couches and mornings where I did not recognize the woman in the mirror, but I had come through it. I had found work, returned to school, and carved out a new version of myself that stood tall, even if slightly bruised. And now, here I was, being told that my worth was negotiable, conditional, a favor granted by a man too passive to protest when his own mother reduced me to a cautionary tale. I did not speak. I reached for the engagement ring on my finger. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled it off. The diamond caught the candlelight one last time, glinting as though it, too, had heard the insult. I placed the ring on the white tablecloth in front of Ethan, the sound of metal on fabric muted. Final. Neither of them said a word. I stood, adjusted my chair, picked up my purse, and walked away. No tears, no goodbye, no explanation. There was nothing left to say. Not in that room. Outside, the evening air was cool, a gentle wind brushing against my skin as I walked the dimly lit sidewalk back toward my car. I could hear the faint sounds of music and laughter from inside the restaurant, muffled now, as though they belonged to another world entirely. I drove home in silence. When I reached my apartment, I stood at the kitchen counter for a long time, the imprint of the ring still faintly visible on my finger. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down, stared at the wall, and finally, slept. I didn't expect what came next. The following morning, as sunlight crept through my blinds and painted golden stripes across the floor, my phone began to ring. It was Ethan, again and again and again. 7 missed calls, then a message. "Rachel, please. I didn't mean for it to go like that. Call me." I didn't. I watched the phone vibrate, a silent witness to his delayed remorse. But what he didn't know, what Diane would never understand, is that it wasn't her words that ended it. It was his laughter. It was the sound of his indifference, the betrayal of that single moment where he could have stood up, for me, for us, and chose instead to sit still. And now he wanted to talk. But would words ever be enough? Would he dare try to make things right? Would she even listen? And what exactly was this past they all kept referring to? Stay with me. The story is just beginning. It is an odd feeling to be punished not for what you have done, but for having survived it. In the hours after I left the dinner table, the ring still gleaming on that starched linen, I found myself spiraling not into regret, but into memory. Pain has a peculiar way of revisiting you, not as a linear sequence of events, but as flashes. Smells, sounds, the tightening of your stomach when a name is mentioned, the way your hands remember shaking, even when your voice never did. Ethan never truly asked about my past. He knew pieces of it, the polite, condensed version I shared during our early dates, when vulnerability was carefully rationed and timing mattered. He knew I had been engaged once before, that I had walked away from something that had become dangerous, both emotionally and physically. He had nodded and kissed my forehead, and then swiftly changed the subject to a weekend getaway or a new recipe he had found online. He preferred light, and I had mistaken that for love. I never told him everything, not because I was ashamed, but because I had learned to carry certain truths alone. And because deep down, I suspected he lacked the resilience to truly understand them. But since the dinner, those truths refused to remain quiet. Before Ethan, there was James. We met in college, a whirlwind romance that began with midnight study sessions and laughter in crowded hallways. James was magnetic. Everyone said so. Professors admired him, classmates envied him, I adored him. At first, his control looked like care. He remembered how I took my coffee. He asked where I was going, with whom, when I'd be back. He offered to help me choose my outfits for important events. He complimented me in public and criticized me in private, always under the guise of helping me grow. I didn't see it then. No one ever does until too late. Months into the relationship, the criticism grew sharper. Then came the silence, weaponized and prolonged. He would ignore me for days, then return with affection so overwhelming it made me doubt my own memories. And then, one evening, after I came home 15 minutes late from a group project meeting, he lost control. He didn't hit me, not then. But he grabbed my wrist, hard, too hard, left a faint bruise I covered with foundation for 2 days. I remember sitting on the floor of our tiny kitchen, shaking. He apologized, cried, promised it would never happen again. It did. The next time, it was a door slammed inches from my face. The next, a smashed phone. The next, a night locked out of my own apartment. Eventually, the bruises moved from my body to my spirit. I stopped attending family events. I lost contact with old friends. I dropped out of my last semester. I became small, quiet, manageable. It took almost a year for me to leave. And when I did, I left with a suitcase, $420 in a savings account, and a single sentence written on a note that I left on our shared coffee table. I'm choosing myself this time. I never saw James again. But what he took from me was not limited to those years. I moved into a sublet apartment above a laundromat, took a job waiting tables, and began night classes at a local community college. Every day felt like swimming upstream, and every night brought a different kind of exhaustion, the kind that buries itself in your bones. But I endured. Not because I was fearless, but because I had no choice. I relearned how to speak without apologizing, how to look people in the eye, how to trust my instincts. I began seeing a therapist twice a month. Slowly, my world began to take color again. And then, years later, came Ethan, with his calm voice and his structured life and his admiration for my resilience, though he never asked what it had truly cost me. He admired the outcome, not the process. He fell in love with the woman I had become. But he never questioned what it took for me to become her. There was a moment, early in our relationship, when I should have known. We were visiting his parents for a weekend in September. The leaves had just begun to turn, and Diane had organized a small gathering on the patio of their estate. It was elegant and stifling all at once. I remember standing beside Ethan, holding a glass of sparkling water, when one of his mother's friends asked how we met. Before I could respond, Diane interjected. Rachel came from a more modest background, but she's quite charming, really. It was not the words themselves that unsettled me. It was the tone. That quiet assertion of superiority disguised as politeness. Ethan had laughed it off, as he often did. That's just mom being mom. He kissed my cheek and whispered that I looked beautiful. I forced a smile and said nothing. But something cracked that day. And still, I stayed. Because we do that, don't we? We ignore the early signs. We choose the comfort of not rocking the boat. We convince ourselves that love will smooth over sharp edges, until it doesn't. I knew in the pit of my stomach that Diane had done her research. That evening at the engagement dinner, when she spoke of my past, she wasn't referring only to socioeconomic differences. She meant James. She had likely found out about the restraining order I briefly filed and then withdrew. Perhaps she had heard whispers through mutual acquaintances or online searches. Maybe Ethan had known more than he admitted, or worse, had told her himself. And she used it, not to understand, but to diminish. Considering your history. That phrase replayed in my head for hours. Not out of shame, but out of disbelief that the man I was supposed to marry would allow his mother to speak those words aloud, and remain silent. Or worse. Laugh. It was not a misunderstanding. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that does not require anger, only distance. That night, I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out a small wooden box I hadn't touched in months. Inside were fragments of another life. A photograph of me with my younger sister before everything fell apart, an old Metro card from the city I once escaped, and a folded copy of the note I had left for James. I'm choosing myself this time. And now I would do it again. Only this time, it would not be from fear. It would be from strength. It was nearly midnight when my phone lit up again. Another message from Ethan. Rachel, please, just give me a chance to explain. But what could he explain? That he didn't mean to laugh? That he didn't realize how cruel she was being? That he forgot how hard I had worked to rebuild? I stared at the message. I didn't reply. And yet, some small part of me wanted to know. Not for reconciliation, but for closure, for truth. Was he truly ignorant or simply weak? There was a difference, and it mattered. Would Ethan reveal what he truly knew? Was Diane acting alone, or echoing her son's unspoken thoughts? And what would Rachel decide to do when faced with Ethan one last time? The confrontation is coming, and nothing will be the same after it. The silence between us was not accidental. It was designed, maintained, weaponized. 2 days had passed since I left the engagement dinner, since I placed the ring on the table and walked away without a word. Since I made the choice that women are often shamed for making, the choice to walk away from something that looks perfect on the outside, but fractures the soul from within. Ethan's messages continued. He wrote that he was confused, heartbroken, blindsided. He asked if we could talk, just once. He said I had misunderstood his laugh, that his mother's words didn't reflect his thoughts, that he had never told her anything about my past. But I knew better. There are things a man does not need to say for them to be known. I did not answer, not immediately. Instead, I chose to observe, to wait, to measure his silence now against the silence that had echoed so loudly that night. When his mother used my history as a weapon, and he responded not with anger or defense, but with nervous complicity. When someone shows you who they are in a moment of truth, believe them. On the third evening, just after 7 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't surprised. I stood still for a moment, the evening light filtering through the sheer curtains. The city outside was alive, car horns, footsteps, the occasional laugh. The world continued, unaware of the reckoning happening inside one small apartment. Another knock. Firmer this time. I opened the door. Ethan stood there, suit slightly wrinkled, his hair less carefully styled than usual, eyes red from lack of sleep, or tears, or both. He was holding something in his hand, the ring box. But he did not offer it to me. He simply stood, unsure of whether he was welcome. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. I paused, then stepped aside. He entered cautiously, like someone afraid of triggering a landmine. He sat down on the edge of the couch, as though he no longer recognized the space, or the woman standing in front of him. "I didn't know she would say that," he began. "I swear to you. I didn't know." I said nothing. He ran a hand through his hair. I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. It was awkward. I wasn't laughing at you. Still, I remained silent. Not to be cruel, but because I had learned that silence invites truth. Finally, he exhaled. "She found something online," he confessed. "I don't know exactly what, but I think it was about your ex, or maybe the apartment you used to live in, or the restraining order." I nodded once, not because I was shocked, but because he had finally admitted it. "So she did know," I said evenly. "Yes." "And you didn't think it was worth warning me?" He looked away. "I thought she wouldn't bring it up, or if she did, it wouldn't be like that. I didn't want to stir things up." "You didn't want to stir things up?" I repeated. He nodded quietly. "So instead," I continued, "you let her say those words. You let her call my survival something I should be grateful for having overlooked. You let her reduce me to a history. And you said nothing." I panicked. "No," I said, with a calm that surprised even me. "You prioritized her comfort over my dignity." His eyes filled with tears. "Rachel, I love you." "I believe you do," I replied. "But love isn't always enough." I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the ring box he had placed there. It was elegant, the velvet soft under my fingertips. The same box I had opened weeks ago with trembling hands when he asked me to marry him in Central Park beneath the cherry blossoms. Back then, I had felt joy, hope, safety. Now, I felt clarity. I opened the box. The diamond sparkled under the soft apartment light. I closed it again and handed it back to him. "This ring deserves a home where silence doesn't echo so loudly," I said. "Where laughter is shared in defense, not avoidance." He looked down at the box, then up at me. "She didn't mean to—" "Stop," I said, firmly but gently. "This isn't about her. It's about you, what you did, and what you didn't do." He swallowed, visibly struggling. "You didn't stand up for me," I said. "You didn't shield me from harm. And I can't marry someone who goes quiet when I need him to be loud." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence was different now. Not tense, but filled with the weight of finality. He rose slowly, slipped the ring box back into his coat pocket. and looked at me one last time. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know." And with that, he left. The door clicked shut behind him. I stood alone in the soft glow of the apartment, listening to the echo of his footsteps fading down the hallway. I did not cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because I had already mourned the version of him I had imagined. What I felt now was not sorrow, but a quiet, steady resolve. Later that evening, as I sat at my desk writing in the journal I had kept for years, the one filled with pages of heartbreak and healing, I found myself drawing a single line in ink across a blank page. There is dignity in walking away, even when the world calls it giving up. It wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the end of being polite in the face of cruelty, the end of second-guessing my own strength, the end of compromising my history to accommodate someone else's comfort. But as I turned off the light and walked toward my bedroom, a different thought came over me, one I couldn't shake. If Diane had found out about James, what else had she found? And how? And more importantly, had Ethan really told me everything? What secret was Ethan still hiding? Had Diane's intrusion gone deeper than Rachel suspected? And what happens when a woman discovers not only betrayal, but conspiracy? The story is far from over, and the truth is only beginning to reveal itself. There are moments in life when time does not move forward. It fractures. A word, a gesture, or an unexpected discovery becomes a fault line, exposing everything you thought was solid beneath your feet. What I found that morning was not just a letter. It was the splintering of illusion. It had been a week since Ethan walked out of my apartment with the ring still in his pocket. The city had continued its mechanical rhythm around me, trains arriving, emails sent, groceries purchased, but I had entered a different kind of silence. Not the silence of grief, the silence of recalibration. The silence that comes after the storm, when you start to clean up the wreckage and find beneath the debris something worse. The proof that the storm was not nature's doing, but someone's deliberate act. The letter came to me by accident, or fate. It was Saturday morning. I was returning from a walk, my mind still heavy with the remnants of a dream in which Ethan had tried to speak, but no sound came from his mouth. I had stopped at the corner cafe to pick up my usual black coffee and almond croissant. The barista, a quiet man named Julian, handed me a small parcel along with my drink. "This was left here for you," he said. "Guy came by yesterday afternoon. Said he didn't know your address, but knew you came here often." There was no return address. Just my name, printed neatly on the front. Rachel Miller. The handwriting struck me. Clean, controlled, familiar. I opened it on the bench just outside the cafe. Inside was a single envelope, the kind used for formal correspondence, sealed with wax, and within it, folded twice with meticulous precision, was a letter, handwritten. It began, "Rachel, I know you will hate me for this, but I couldn't let you believe a lie any longer. You deserve to know the truth about everything, about Ethan, about me, about what was said and what was planned long before you walked into that restaurant." The signature at the bottom stunned me. Anna, Diane's sister. I had met Anna only once at a family brunch a few months earlier. She was different from Diane, softer, less polished. A school teacher, I remembered. Someone who had chosen simplicity over status. She had been kind to me in that brief interaction, and I sensed then a quiet discomfort when Diane made her usual, veiled comments about class and standards. Now, her letter opened the floodgates. She wrote that Diane had known everything, long before Ethan ever proposed, that she had hired someone to investigate me, that Ethan had been aware of this investigation, but allowed it to proceed under the justification of protecting the family, that Diane had discovered records, the police report I had filed years ago against James, the dropped restraining order, even transcripts from my counseling sessions, somehow leaked from a digital health platform. But it didn't end there. The dinner had been staged. Ethan had been warned in advance that his mother intended to test me with a carefully phrased provocation. He had agreed. Not because he supported it, Anna claimed, but because he believed that if Rachel passes this, Mom will finally back off. The phrase haunted me. If Rachel passes this. As though my life, my survival, my entire sense of self-worth were a final exam at a dinner table surrounded by candlelight and quiet condescension. Anna's letter was a confession, a revolt, a belated act of justice. "I should have told you sooner," she wrote. "I was a coward, but I am tired of watching my sister destroy what she doesn't understand. And I'm tired of watching Ethan become a version of himself that disgusts me." She ended with a final note. "I'm enclosing something else. She asked me to mail it for her, but I couldn't. I kept it. And now, you deserve to see it." It was a card, a greeting card. Beautiful on the outside, navy blue with a silver border. Inside, Diane had written in flawless cursive, "Welcome to the family, Rachel. You've come far. Let's hope you know how to stay in your place." I sat there on the cafe bench for what must have been over an hour. The coffee turned cold beside me. My croissant remained untouched. I read the letter 3 times. Each word sank deeper, like stones into water. Not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed every silent suspicion I had dismissed as paranoia. Ethan had known. He had not simply failed to defend me, he had conspired to test me. He had allowed a performance of cruelty to take place, then laughed when the curtain fell. It was not just betrayal, it was orchestration. I thought back to the night he proposed. We had stood beneath a blooming cherry blossom tree in Central Park. He had gotten down on one knee, held my hand, and said, "I know your story, and I still choose you." How hollow that sentence sounded now. He had known a version of my story, the one his mother had handed him in a dossier, not the one I would have told him myself. I returned to my apartment and placed the letter on my kitchen table, staring at it for a long time. I felt many things, but above all, I felt clean. The confusion had lifted. The fog of self-doubt, the shame, the second-guessing, all of it was gone. In its place stood something firmer. Certainty. I would not speak to Ethan again, but I would do something else. I would respond. Not to him, not to Diane, but to the truth itself. Because truth, once revealed, demands acknowledgement. That evening, I sat down at my laptop and began writing. Not a letter, but a statement. A record. The full story of what had happened. Not just between Ethan and me, but before that. My history, my strength, my survival. I titled the document, "What You Did Not See." It was not revenge, it was release. I knew I might never send it, but I needed it to exist. Sometimes healing begins not with forgiveness, but with narration, with reclaiming the story others tried to rewrite. I thought the chapter had closed, but the universe is rarely that kind. The next morning, as I opened my inbox, a new email sat unread at the top of the list. Subject: You weren't supposed to know, but now that you do. The sender: Diane Whitmore. What did Diane still have to say? Would Rachel respond or finally turn the page? And what happens when a woman reclaims not just her story, but her voice? The end is not always an ending. Sometimes it's the beginning of something greater. The subject line lingered in my inbox like an open wound. You weren't supposed to know, but now that you do? It sat there, bolded, unread, as though daring me to click. To descend once more into the war I had just begun to leave behind. For a full hour I stared at it without moving. Not out of fear, but of measured restraint. I had spent so much of my life responding instinctively, surviving, apologizing, deflecting. But now I understood something that changed everything. I no longer owed anyone an immediate reaction. When I finally opened Diane's message, it wasn't rage that met me. It was calculation. The email was brief, impeccably punctuated. Every word chosen with surgical precision. Rachel, I understand that Anna has shared things with you that she had no right to. I won't deny what you now know. It was never personal. It was necessary. My son has a future to protect. His name, his legacy, his choices, and they matter. You may see my actions as cruel, but history will prove they were wise. I wish you well, truly. Diane Whitmore. It was not an apology. It was a confession disguised as confidence. a final stroke of the knife wrapped in velvet. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was only sorry that I knew. And with those few lines, the last piece of the puzzle slid into place. I closed the email, deleted it, then emptied the trash folder. Some truths deserve to be seen once, then buried. Not to forget them, but to strip them of their power. In the weeks that followed, something inside me began to realign. For the first time in years, I did not feel like I was building my life back. I was not returning to who I used to be. I was becoming someone new. My apartment, once a temporary stopover in the aftermath of heartbreak, began to feel like a sanctuary. I changed the lighting, added plants to the windowsills, bought books I had long wanted to read but never felt worthy of. I also began writing again. Not in fragments, but in full chapters. I wrote about women who walked away from expectations, from silence, from rooms filled with people who smiled while gutting them gently. One of those women was me. And though I never published those stories, I shared them. Quietly. With women at my support group, with strangers online, with myself. What Ethan never understood, what Diane could never comprehend, was that I had not fought my way back to a normal life just to fit into theirs. My healing was not decorative. My silence was not submission. It was self-preservation, and now it was choice. One evening, as I stood on my apartment balcony watching the city lights flicker like constellations at my feet, I received a message. Not from Ethan, not from Diane, from someone I hadn't spoken to in over 3 years. James. The name paralyzed me for a moment. 1,000 emotions surged and crashed in an instant. I opened the message with hands that trembled. Not from fear, but from memory. I saw a story online. I think it's about you. If it is, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know I don't deserve a reply. I just needed you to know. I read it twice, then deleted it. Closure, I had learned, is not something others give you. It is something you take, one choice at a time. There was no wedding, no dramatic reunion, no letter in the mail bearing a sudden change of heart. Instead, there was peace. And in that peace, a question began to form. Not a fearful one, but a curious one. A quiet knocking at the door of my future. What might my life become if I no longer make decisions based on fear? Weeks later, I received a small package in the mail. No return address. Inside was the ring. The same one I had left on that table, gleaming beneath flickering candlelight. And a single note in Ethan's handwriting. You were never the one who needed to prove herself. I see that now. Keep this if you wish. Not as a symbol of what we were, but of what you had the strength to walk away from. I placed the ring in a drawer. Not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. Even beautiful things can be heavy. Even promises can be cages. Even love, if not accompanied by courage, can become complicity. Today, when I look in the mirror, I do not see a survivor. I see a creator. I created a life, a boundary, a voice that does not tremble when it speaks. The world often demands that women shrink to fit into the arms of men who cannot hold their full weight. But I am no longer shrinking. I am standing. Not for him. Not against her, but for me. And yet, there is one final thing I haven't told you. About that last line in Anna's letter. She ended it with a warning. Diane may seem done with you, but she is never truly done. Be careful. There's more. I didn't understand what she meant, not then. But 2 nights ago, someone followed me home. They didn't speak. They just stood across the street beneath a broken streetlight, watching, waiting. And now, I find myself asking, what if this story wasn't about escape, but about what follows you after you've walked away? Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is walk away quietly and rebuild in silence. But beware. Silence does not always mean safety. Some endings are only the beginning of the next trial.